KinderCare operates over 1,000 daycare centers across 41 states, and it has been revealed that there is systemic abuse across these daycare centers, and very little, if anything, is being done about it. What's worse, our taxpayer dollars are actually funding this abuse. Today, we've got investigative reporter Edwin Dorsey detailing his new and damning report about KinderCare. He will also be detailing his past reports about care.com and Roblox. Both of these companies have had practices endangering children. Oh my goodness, the details of what he has discovered over the years, they're absolutely chilling, and we as parents need to know about it. Don't just listen to and watch the entirety of this episode. Share it with every parent, every grandparent, every caretaker that you know. This episode is brought to you by our friends at Good Ranchers. Go to goodranchers.com, use code Allie. It's goodranchers.com, code Allie. Edwin, thanks so much for taking the time to join us. Could you tell us who you are and what you do?
Yeah, Allie, thanks for having me on Relatable. I write a newsletter called The Bear Cave, which is a Substack publication focused on exposing corporate misconduct. There's two real components to the newsletter. There's a free component where I kind of aggregate the news in finance and the short seller world. So I'll summarize activist short campaigns, highlight suspicious resignations, and link to interesting articles and tweets. And then there's a paid tier of the newsletter where twice a month I do some like deep dive kind of investigative journalism, generally looking at a $1 to $10 billion public company that I think is misleading investors or harming customers. And that's what I do with the newsletter.
Okay, how'd you get into this?
So I've been passionate about stocks from a really young age. Like second grade, I was all about the stock market.
Wow.
In college, I interned at various hedge funds, and I thought that's the route I was going to take and work for hedge funds and short sellers in particular. However, the fund I was interning for, which was a very large short seller fund that did a lot of investigative research, they were in the process of shutting down my senior year. So I needed to get a job, and I figured that if I started writing smart stuff online, people would want to hire me. So I started this newsletter mainly as a way to get a job, but it got really popular very fast in the pandemic, quickly became a full-time income. And it's been what I've been doing for the last 5 years. It's my only source of income, reader subscriptions, and it's been pretty decent. So it's a lot of fun.
Yes. So I saw a headline about your research into KinderCare, and I'm a mom of young kids, and we've got a lot of moms out there listening. I've never, interacted with KinderCare. My kids, didn't go to daycare, but I'm really interested in how a company like this functions, and I was really disturbed by some of the things you found. So can you tell us, first of all, what tipped you off into looking into KinderCare, and then what did you find?
So my newsletter has a pretty long history of looking at big public companies that have some issues with child safety. I wrote on care.com 5 or 6 years ago. Over the last few years, I've written a lot about Roblox, pretty successfully highlighting safety issues before the mainstream media gets to it. KinderCare got on my radar for a somewhat odd reason. I was using ChatGPT Pro. I'm always looking for new companies. And I asked it, can you look through all the recent IPOs of public companies and find ones with high levels of consumer complaints? And it gave me a list of 10. KinderCare was on that list. And when I went through the list of companies with high levels of consumer complaints, KinderCare stood out as the one that had a lot of issues and that, is kind of, harming the public. So that's how they got on my radar. It wasn't from a person or like any novel research. It was literally just asking ChatGPT for companies with high levels of consumer complaints. One thing that I'm very good at is using FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to get copies of complaints people are sending regulators. So one common thing I'll do in my research is I'll go to the FTC and see what complaints people are submitting to the FTC, and go to local state attorney general offices and see what complaints people are submitting to state AGs. And when I did that for KinderCare, I kind of got a high level of complaints about this daycare company, which is the largest daycare company in the US. A few 100,000 kids go to it, over 1,500 locations. And the kind of one pattern that stood out to me about KinderCare is they seem to have like a lot of child safety issues, and not the type of stuff you'd normally expect where, maybe a kid like fights with another kid or somebody has allergies. There was like issues where kids were escaping from the KinderCare locations,
Oh
kids were getting
gosh.
locked in rooms, with no supervisions, kids were overdosing on drugs brought by the staff. There was just tons of these, local news stories across the board of KinderCare mistreating the kids they're watching. And, that's kind of the crux of my article and why people should pay attention.
Okay, kids are overdosing on drugs. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so there was one case where a woman, dropped her kid off at KinderCare. 6 hours later, she was told, you need to pick up your kid. He's throwing up. He's feeling sick." And she took him home, and she knew right away something was wrong, like the motherly instinct. And so she went back to KinderCare and said, like, "What happened? Like, my kid was fine this morning, and now he's very, very sick and like has all these bruises, and it's like clearly something's wrong." And KinderCare denied anything was wrong, and but the mother knew something was wrong, so she took her kid to the hospital, and the hospital did a drug test, and this kid, this like 2-year old, tested positive for cocaine. And the police got involved, and first they pointed the finger at her and are like, "You must be doing cocaine in your house, and your
Hmm.
kid's overdosing on that." So they searched the house and like drug tested her, and nothing was wrong. And then they went to the daycare, the KinderCare daycare, and it turns out one of the staff members had brought cocaine to work in a bag, and the kid,
Oh
had
my
gotten access
gosh.
to this worker's backpack and like ingested some of the cocaine, and that's why this kid tested positive for cocaine. And
Okay,
that sounds absurd. And this daycare
crazy.
had been
Yeah.
cited for a lot of safety violations in the past. It was ultimately shut down. But this is the type of pattern of misconduct you'll see at KinderCare locations. There's about 70 in the state of Texas. There's hundreds nationwide. It's kind of crazy what goes on when you don't have like good corporate controls to prevent this stuff. And the common theme I see in all these KinderCare cases is the company is never transparent with the parents about what happened. In this case, it only came out because the mom like took 4 steps to figure out what happened. So that's like
Yeah.
one of the more absurd cases that happened just a year ago.
Yes, we have a video clip of Kimberly, the mother, expressing
Yeah.
regret over sending her child to KinderCare. It's top 4.
Like at the time he was 11 months old, he's just so innocent. Like if you knew the baby before, like he was just so happy. His daily routine has been messed up due to, unfortunately, what happened at KinderCare. He has a lot of developmental delays now. Might be special needs now. I wish I didn't send him to KinderCare that day. I wish that day I wouldn't have. That day just changed everything.
Ugh, poor thing. I mean, you can just see the desperation. So that KinderCare, Oak Creek KinderCare, as you said, had prior safety violations that included staff being aggressive with infants, undocumented injuries, and access to power tools and toxic chemicals. Then there was a woman in April of 2021. She posted a video of a toddler on the streets outside Milford, Connecticut KinderCare. When she alerted the daycare staff, they had, quote, no idea that the child had been missing. The boy's father only learned of the incident after the woman's video went viral online. So after that happened, KinderCare didn't even inform this dad, "Oh yeah, sorry, your kid escaped."
Yeah, no, this is so there's 2 incidences in my article where, a kid literally just escapes the daycare, usually by opening a window and then rolling out. Somebody is like, the kid gets far, like he's walking down busy streets, people are taking videos. Ultimately,
Ugh.
somebody like will find the kid, and no one knows like who this like 2-year-old belongs to. So they'll bring it to like a nearby business or something. And KinderCare, when this happens, they don't even notice the kid's missing. They don't inform the parents. It's just like, and even though there's been 2 cases where this has gone viral on Facebook of someone taking a video of a KinderCare kid escaping, I'm really confident this is happening a lot more at KinderCare locations. There was one complaint I saw to the Ohio Attorney General that I got through FOIA, where a parent was like, "My kid escaped from a KinderCare," and I had no idea until, someone told me. So, I know of at least 3 cases where kids are escaping from KinderCare. And this is like way more than on any other chain. It seems like a pretty simple and basic issue for a daycare. You got to make sure the kids can't escape. And that's going on repeatedly at KinderCare.
Yeah.
So yeah, they definitely have some odd issues here, and it's always not being transparent with the parents.
Yeah.
In every single case, the parents are like, I didn't know what happened. KinderCare didn't tell me, but I found out from someone else. So this
Yeah.
definitely seems like a pattern here. And if you look just, in any state, there's often databases where these daycares are ranked and evaluated. KinderCare is consistently worse than the average, which is the exact opposite of what you'd expect for like a big company that has all the resources to have like good internal controls.
Right, because you found that they are receiving hundreds of millions of dollars in government subsidies. And so they're
Yeah.
not hurting for money, in addition to having so many paying families that are sending their kids there. And yet they get complaint after complaint. You found that. And it's only after several complaints, or I guess the news starts reporting on something that happened at one of these local branches, that they end up shutting down. Why is it that there is so much grace for these KinderCare centers that repeatedly are receiving these kinds of very serious complaints?
Allie, that's a great question. And I don't know, but it definitely should change. And that's a great point about taxpayers paying for this. So KinderCare largely caters to working families. They also have a program to watch the children of kids whose parents are in the military, so service members. And about 35% of their revenue comes from the US taxpayer, which is their largest source of revenue, through the Child Care Development Block Grant, which was started in 1990 under George H.W. Bush, with the idea being that early childhood education, having kids in like informative daycares, is so beneficial to early childhood education and to kids' development that the government should be subsidizing it. And the reality is it's kind of like the opposite. Kids in KinderCare, in addition to all these safety issues and ingesting cocaine and roaming the streets, it does not seem like it's like beneficial for your development to have 20 kids in a room supervised by someone earning $12 an hour in a corporate environment that just doesn't care about these kids. So it's a complete, abuse of taxpayer funds. The government has huge ability to flex on these centers and not just shut them down or withhold state subsidies for these centers. I think there is kind of an element of regulatory capture that exists across corporate America, where the big companies, ultimately control the regulators. Because KinderCare is so large, they have the ability to push back harder than any other entity. So if, a lot of daycares are just, one-offs owned by somebody or a nonprofit, if that gets shut down, they might not have the resources to fight back. But what you see in KinderCare is sometimes they get shut down, but then there's an appeal process, and KinderCare will be really good at the appeal process and have the best lawyers and fight back. It's something you see on Reddit threads where KinderCare employees talk is they say they're very good at just roping everything together properly right before licensing and inspections, and then things fall apart right after. So I think there's kind of a corporate strategy around like pulling things together just for inspections and then laxing all the standards after. There's a corporate strategy of fighting back aggressively on suspensions. And I think regulators also aren't doing their jobs. So I think those three factors is why this continues to exist. And it's kind of bizarre because it's not just a private company. It's a private company getting hundreds of millions a year in taxpayer subsidies to do harm.
First sponsor for the day is a new sponsor. It is Shopify. Shopify is the commerce platform behind millions of businesses around the world, 10% of all e-commerce in the US, and there is a reason for that. They make selling your merchandise, your products, really easy. When I first started Relatable and my brand, it just seemed like I had to do everything on my own, figure out what my branding was going to look like, how to sell merchandise. And I've used Shopify. Shopify makes things so simple. It's not just that you are putting your already designed product on Shopify to sell it. You can do that. But if you need help with branding, design, how to design your products, then Shopify can help you with all of that. It really is kind of like a one-stop shop for you to be able to design your merch and sell your products. And they just make it so simple. I'm someone who is only moderately tech savvy, and so I need things to be really easy. And that is why I love Shopify so much. Their design studio is really intuitive. So I know I've got a lot of small business owners out there. And if you don't have Shopify yet to help you create and sell your products, then you need to go ahead and start your account right now. You'll see how easy it is. Turn your business idea into a sale with Shopify on your side. Sign up for your $1 per month trial. Start selling today at shopify.com/Allie. That's just $1 a month with my link, shopify.com/Allie. Okay, you said that employees getting paid $12 an hour. I don't know if that was hyperbole or if that is literally what some of these employees are getting paid, $12 an hour.
Yeah, no, it's very, very, very low. Like working in early childhood education is a very, very low paid field, partly because there's not a lot of like credentials required for it. Now, it might vary by state, but yeah, these are very low paying jobs. They have extremely high turnover. And, one of the bigger issues here is KinderCare, is now publicly traded. And for the last 10 years have been owned by like a Swiss private equity firm. And if you look at just kind of the private equity playbook, anytime they get in healthcare or childhood education, is you need to increase profits, and you can't necessarily raise the prices of watching these kids, partly because the subsidies are capped at a certain rate, partly because it's just like a standardized thing and you can't, be priced above market. So your profits come from cutting costs. And the way you cut costs is you lower the wages people are paid, and you reduce the numbers of workers. So KinderCare has largely grown through acquisitions. They acquire an existing facility, and when they do, they lay people off and they typically lower the pay. So KinderCare is not a leader in compensation. And as a result, you have the higher turnover. So there was one study by the Women's Law Center that found these private equity-backed daycares tend to have the highest levels of turnover, way higher than independently owned ones or nonprofit ones, which is problematic because if you got a new person coming in every 6 months, you're not going to be able to build relationships with them. How do you know if you can trust them? So that's kind of one issue with KinderCare. And yeah, I think that's a kind of a big factor that contributes to the low quality of cares people are getting is these people are paid low, they're paid lower than anyone else in the industry, and there's significant turnover.
Yeah. They are, I guess, people who at times are just desperate for work. Maybe they don't have credentials. And since you don't have to have credentials to work in a place like KinderCare, they get this job and they have no interest in children. They don't even have the temperament, some of these people, for children. And so you get the people who should at least be working with children who obviously can't defend themselves, are in very vulnerable situations. And it sounds like KinderCare realizes that this is a problem, but they have all of the mechanics in place to protect themselves as much as possible.
Exactly. And, you're going to get everybody who's been fired or couldn't get jobs at the better daycares. There might be like some low levels of licensing and training required, but I read a lot of the forums where these former employees talk and, they talk about not being prepared. And one kind of common thing with KinderCare is there's a lot of rules around staffing. You need to have a certain number of staff members per kids, and you can't be out of ratio. And KinderCare is constantly out of ratio. And now the government isn't going to really know unless there's inspection exams that KinderCare might send an extra employee or two there for the inspection exam. So because KinderCare is constantly out of ratio, it's tough to hire people in any environment. Then you get desperate for anybody, which is how you have people bringing cocaine to a daycare where a 2-year-old's going to overdose and then the mom's going to be blamed. And it's a total mess. It's a total disgrace. And then a lot of the people, one common theme I found just looking into a lot of companies and doing this a lot, getting consumer complaints, is it's always the working class people who are getting taken advantage of the most and who are least equipped to defend themselves. So, if you did this with, upper class families who have access to lawyers and maybe more of an educational pedigree, this would get shut down so fast. They'd go to reporters, they'd hire lawyers, they'd sue. Back to your clip with the woman, Miss Hobson, whose son overdosed. I don't think she mentioned hiring a lawyer. I don't think she even mentioned suing them. And she said the happiest day she'd experienced was the day the KinderCare was shut down. So when you're taking advantage of working class people who have, just less wherewithal to defend themselves, then it's especially abusive. So just across the board, when I look at companies that are hurting children, it's almost always working class families who just have a ton on their plate. They can't devote as much time to this. They don't have as much money to, devote to this. And the most infuriating thing is this is literally being paid for by taxpayers. And even though there's a lot of local media reporting on it, there's been no mainstream mainstream media reporting on it. And I know
Wow.
one big theme with Relatable is the failures of the mainstream media. And I would point to this as another one. This is very relevant. It's national. It's happening nationwide. It involves taxpayer funds. And we haven't seen a single national paper write
Right.
about this, even though it's been going on for a while.
Okay, so some of the scenarios that you described: October 2021, an infant died after being sick all day at a KinderCare, and they denied that there was any negligence. But then the same daycare in Ohio faced 2 formal complaints around child injuries. As of April 16th, that KinderCare in Ohio is still operational. In February 2022, a KinderCare in southern Florida locked a 2-year-old inside alone because the mom was 15 minutes late. The mom had to call the police to open the door to get her 2-year-old, who was standing on a chair screaming for help. 2 years old, that's a baby. In August of 2022, police officers arrested a Florida KinderCare teacher for child abuse after, quote, yelling at the child victim and repeatedly punching the child with an open and closed fist to the back and side of the head. Oh my gosh. April 2023, 2 parents in Texas sewed a recording device into their 20-month-old toddler's jacket. The recorded audio captured a KinderCare employee threatening the children, saying, "I'm going to beat both of y'all. That's what I'm going to do. I'm about to throw some BITCH swings at some of y'all right now. Get up and move. Sit down. There's a baby that whimpers. Sit your ass down. Come sit down. Touch it and you die. Just get away from me because I will end up in jail." That was a teacher talking to babies, talking to toddlers at a KinderCare in Texas. And not all of these facilities have been closed down even after these things have become public, right?
Oh yeah, almost none of them have been closed down. There's a local media reporting. There's some outrage. They fire the person if there is like media reporting, and then they move. It's so like comically absurd. There was one case in which that you didn't mention, in which the KinderCare, like there was like nap time. The kids were sleeping. And the kid isn't doing anything. Like the girl is completely asleep, like a 2-year-old. And one of the KinderCare employees is just like pouring water on her forehead to wake her up. And she wakes up and falls back to sleep. And they're just like pouring water, like sadistically on these kids while they're sleeping. And they think it's funny. So the other KinderCare employee is literally like videotaping it and uploading it to Snapchat, them just like literally messing with the kids in their sleep.
Evil.
And this is what happens when you have no like controls. This is what happens when you don't care about kids. This is what happens when you have like a bunch of like immature 20-year-olds like just watching kids messing around. This is what happens when there's like no accountability. And that facility isn't shut down, and they're going to say it's a one-off and they fire their people. But yeah, it's absurd, and it happens at a much higher rate at KinderCare versus any of these other facilities, and it's a big problem. And I think I don't know all the rules around licensing, but it seems to be very friendly to these daycares. They have so many opportunities and to appeal and defend themselves. And one big problem is evidence. So, in any large corporation, you generally see the corporation trying to create a lot of documentation to protect themselves. With KinderCare, it's the opposite. KinderCare facilities rarely have cameras internally or externally. And, the joke I've seen on forums is they don't want cameras because they don't want to get sued, because the cameras are going to show their employees doing stuff badly. So a lot of daycares, they want cameras. So as things go wrong, you can say, no, look, this kid tripped, or we're not negligent.
Right.
But here, KinderCare intentionally doesn't want cameras because they know they're going to be negligent and would contribute to lawsuits. And for a lot of parents, it's like they have an intuition something's wrong. They have an intuition to sew a recording device on their child. But they absent that, how do you gather the evidence? It's like really tough to kind of prove abuse in these closed door facilities where you can't know what's going on, in which there's no video footage to back you up, even if you went to the police. So you'll have a lot of stories where parents are like, my kids really didn't want to go there. But as a mom, I just assumed that, my kid didn't want to go to daycare. And it's like that at every daycare, but she just loves being home. But then they realize there is some abuse going on. And they're like, actually, I wish I noticed this sooner. There is something really wrong about the KinderCare facilities. And one way you'd expect this to manifest, you'd expect a lot of online reviews and negative stories. And like any large corporation, KinderCare is trying to play games to smooth over their image and suppress the story. So one thing I found looking at a lot of online complaints, especially complaints to the FTC, is, I see parents going to the FTC and saying, look, I had a bad experience with KinderCare. The reason I went to go to KinderCare is they had a ton of positive online reviews on Google, but I later learned that KinderCare would email all the parents repeatedly, offering them $50 tuition discounts if they posted positive reviews. So part of the reason this happens is KinderCare, I'm pretty sure against the law, is offering discounts and subsidies to people just to post positive reviews to deceive more parents to coming into the KinderCare ecosystem.
Yeah, I just can't get over the fact that they are purposely targeting and manipulating, I'm guessing in many cases, economically desperate people. A lot of single parents who maybe they'd love to stay home, but they can't stay home because they are the only income earner, or just low income people they can't afford a nanny, they can't afford the nicer daycare, maybe they don't have the option of staying home. I don't know, but it is taking advantage of poor or working class families. And that is how they know they can get away with this kind of abuse. And because they don't want to cut into profits, they continually hire people that should not be around children. And that is very disturbing to me. Next sponsor, Fellowship Home Loans. If you want to work with people that align with your values, if you don't want to have to worry if they secretly hate you because you're a Christian, especially when you're making a really big purchase like the purchase of a home, then you need to work with a mortgage company that actually aligns with your principles. That's Fellowship Home Loans. I know when I am looking for people to work with, when I am looking for, say, I'm traveling and I need a makeup artist before a speaking engagement, or even if I'm looking for someone to help decorate my house, a million different services that we use throughout our lives, I am getting so focused on my desire to work with people who are Christians, to work with people that share my values. And it seems like that would be even more important when you are refinancing your home or you are making such a big decision like purchasing a home. You just want to make sure that the people you're working with are dealing honestly with you. They've got integrity, that they are going to do a good job because they are working heartily for the Lord and not just for man's approval. And that is what you will get when you are working with Fellowship Home Loans. I have talked with Mike and Brian. They're the real deal. All of their employees are dedicated to glorifying God and serving you well. So check them out. Go to fellowshiphomeloans.com. fellowshiphomeloans.com/Allie. When you use my link, you'll get a $500 credit towards closing costs. That's fellowshiphomeloans.com/Allie. Nationwide Mortgage Bankers, DBA Fellowship Home Loans, Equal Housing Lender, NMLS number 819382. Do you know anything about the CEO or the CEOs, of the past? Has there ever been an effort that you know of to change the culture of what's going on here?
I know there's been some turnover at the executive level. They've only been public for less than a year. They were bought by a Swiss private equity firm in 2015, Partners Group. And that's when, as far as I can tell, things started to go,
South.
much worse. For a long time, it's always been the cheapest, lowest paying daycare. But I think this private equity model of growing through acquisitions, cutting costs, especially over the last 10 years at Partners Group, is where there's been an issue. I don't think it's limited to one CEO. I think it's like the culture of the organization.
Right.
As far as I can tell, it's like, it's just about maintaining licensing. I don't think there's been any concerted effort to really improve the quality of care there because there's no financial incentive to do so. Now, I want to kind of revisit the past point you made, Allie, on this is preying on working class people, because that's absolutely true. They're often the lowest cost provider in any state. I think it's even deeper than that. So one thing I see in complaints is people will say, look, the director offered parents to pay cash directly to the director at, maybe a slightly inflated rate. And then the director would pay electronically out of their own bank account for kids. So because KinderCare officially will only accept checks and electronic payments, but there's a lot of paying under the table and cash to the directors. And to me, whenever I see that, I think they're dealing with undocumented immigrants or people who don't have bank accounts, and those kids are being watched in KinderCare. So I kind of suspect that it's probably the daycare of choice for undocumented immigrants who need to pay cash kind of under the table to KinderCare directors. And that's what you see from consumer complaints. You see a lot of complaints about billing. So not only do they give low quality of care, they charge people after the kids have left. They charge early termination fees or they bill you even if you don't have a kid in the system. They promise to refund you and they won't. I saw one complaint in which it's like literally military service members, and they have a special program dealing with military families, and they get deployed and they need to like move their kids to like their new army base, and KinderCare won't let them out of their daycare contract. I'm like, how can you like advertise yourself and promote yourself to military service members and then not let the kids out of contracts when you need to move to a new military base? It's so absurd. It appeals to working class families where both parents are working, the exact type of behavior you want in America. Subsidize the government to harm the exact type of working class families you should be trying to help.
And there has been problems repeatedly 2017, 2021, 2023, multiple 2023, 2024, also 2020, where KinderCare teachers have been accused of producing child sex abuse material and also just possessing child sex abuse material, but endangering the children that they're actually working with because of what they're trying to create, the kind of content that they're trying to make.
Yeah. If you're like, a bad person and want access to young kids, like there's no better place than a KinderCare. And, if the internal controls are really bad, like this is the exact type of environment where it can go on for a long time and people look the other way. One thing you see constantly in KinderCare is they never want to write formal reports. They never want to notify parents. They never want to like create an incident report. And this type of world where like there's no documentation and no cameras, and it's like the perfect breeding ground for, sex offenders and demented people.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how severe it is compared to other daycares, but like, it's just kind of obvious you don't want and it's always men. It's almost never the woman. It's always men. And it's like, if you're a man who's taking a job at like a very low paying KinderCare, with a history of abuses, it's like, I don't know. It's
all the red flags, the reddest
twist.
of flags, the reddest of flags. On an earnings call last month, you reported that KinderCare CEO Paul Thompson told analysts that roughly 35% of the company's revenue comes from the Child Care and Development Block Grant. That's the federal program that sends money to states to subsidize child care for working families. 35%. That's a lot.
Yeah, it's hundreds of millions of dollars. And there might be changes under the Trump administration to this. So it's been rumored DOGE is going to want to look at this program and cut costs. However, you also see the opposite in some of the things President Trump is saying, where he wants to incentivize more babies being born and wants to give a credit if you have a kid. And, if you really want to incentivize people to have more kids, maybe you try to subsidize childcare more. The issue to me is like large bureaucracies, federal government, state government. It's like they kind of approach it and just subsidize childcare and don't do enough to discriminate among the childcare providers, because you should in theory be giving huge subsidies to the person that's giving, great food to the kids, a great learning environment, letting the kids form friendships. Like that is good for long-term development. And you should be giving practically no subsidies to private equity-backed firms that are just trying to make the most amount of money possible. It drives me nuts that taxpayers fund this nonsense.
I'm going to do everything possible to have Elon Musk watch or listen to this episode just so DOGE can get to this one thing, because I care so much about child safety, and I just hate the thought that we are subsidizing with hundreds of millions of dollars this kind of child endangerment.
Your taxpayer dollars are going to a woman who's bringing cocaine to a daycare and where a 2-year-old's going to overdose on it. And it's so wrong. And so the way the federal grant works is I think money goes to the states, and then the states can choose how to disperse it. And, some states have gotten a little smarter where they'll rate. I think Ohio state rates the daycares, bronze, silver, and gold based on the quality of care being delivered. And if you're giving higher quality care, then in theory, you're going to get slightly higher subsidies from the government. And I think that's smart. And in those models, KinderCare gets a little less money. But you need to aggressively tier it more. And this is just where it's like private equity is so exploitative. They're going to be like perfect at like doing this playbook to figure out how to get the most amount of subsidies and just fit the check the box narrative that some inspector is going to use to like distribute subsidies, but they're not going to actually deliver great care. And then the independent practitioner who actually cares about kids but is less nuanced in the system, they're going to get less subsidies for developing better care. So I would love Elon and Doge to take an axe of this, get a few $100 million back from KinderCare and say like you can't be abusing kids with taxpayer dollars. I think that is very, very, very needed. It would make me very happy.
Next sponsor is preborn. So we're talking about the importance of protecting children. That doesn't start when they're outside of the womb. That starts when they're inside of the womb. Those smallest babies are made in the image of God, even when they're not earthside yet. We want to serve their moms and dads and help them make life-affirming decisions. And preborn is a network of clinics across the country that helps mom do that. They provide free prenatal vitamins, free sonograms, free education, free resources about parenting and adoption. We want to do everything possible to love that mom, love the dad, and love the baby inside the womb. And we want her to see that baby inside the womb because she's so much more likely to choose life when she does. That's why I am asking you to please, in honor of Mother's Day, donate $28 to preborn. That covers the cost of a life-saving ultrasound. But whatever you can donate is great. Maybe it's $2.80, or maybe it's $28,000. Whatever God is putting on your heart to donate, I encourage you to do that. Go to preborn.com/Allie to make that donation. That is preborn.com/Allie. Okay, you mentioned care.com, and I know this was, you said 5 or 6 years ago that you were reporting on this, but I'm curious about what you found because this is kind of the same category. If people don't know, care.com, you can go there and try to book a nanny or a babysitter. It's basically like a kind of like a matching service for people who are seeking babysitters, right?
Yeah, so care.com played a huge deal in my professional development. I was a college student when I started talking about it, and this is what I would say made me a little famous or gave me credibility where people cared what I had to say, that hedge funds wanted to pay for my newsletter to see who I'd criticize. The care.com incident in college is really what, I would say put me on the map in some ways. So care.com, it's a huge babysitting platform for parents to find babysitters and babysitters to advertise their services to parents. And a huge thing for any babysitting platform is safety. You got to make sure the people are who they say they are. You got to make sure they're not sex offenders. You got to run some background check on them. And care.com claimed to be a very safe place to look for babysitters. And they claimed to be running background checks. But I had a friend, and this is my, I think, sophomore year of college, who was a babysitter on the platform and said, look, you should look into them. I get the sense that something is wrong. So I decided to try to test becoming a babysitter on care.com. And the way I tested their process is by trying to sign up as Harvey Weinstein, who was in the news a lot at the time. So I used a photo of Harvey Weinstein. I used the email harveythebabysitter@gmail.com. I made up a social security number. I documented all this process. I just made everything up as Harvey Weinstein. And I consented to their background check on care.com to be a licensed babysitter on there. And they said they'd run the background check and get back to me in 48 hours. And to my amazement, I was approved. Hello, Harvey. I got a verification badge. And as Harvey Weinstein, as a student in college, I was applying to babysitting jobs on care.com. They said I was CPR certified. It was clear they're not running the background checks they claim to do. I made a different account as Daffy Duck and got approved. It's like they're telling parents they're running background checks. They're charging people for background checks, and then they're not running the background checks. Wow. And there had been some local news reporting around lawsuits where parents alleged defective background checks, but here I had concrete evidence that they weren't doing that. So I wrote one article as a college student, and that went a little viral. And then the company, they called my college to get me in trouble. They sent some legal letter to my parents' house, and that made me dig in more. So then I went to every state attorney general to get consumer complaints people had filed on care.com. And I saw tons of safety issues. And I kind of noticed this pattern. First, things will appear in, complaints to state AGs. Then there'll be local media reporting, and then ultimately there'll be a national story. So I became obsessed with care.com. I go to every state AG for consumer complaints. I even go to some police departments, and I ask for all 911 calls that had care.com mentioned in the transcript, because I want to see how extensive all these abuses are. And, there's a lot of people who have criminal histories who are approved to babysit on care.com. There's a lot of people who had their kids taken away from them who then go become babysitters on care.com. There's people who've been banned from running daycares who are, listing their services on care.com. There's people with DUIs and battery charges advertising themselves on care.com, and all unbeknownst to parents. And ultimately, there were 8 kids who were given to care.com babysitters with criminal histories where the parents didn't know, and the kids ended up dying. They're abused, they're beaten up, they're drowned in a pool. And I got obsessed with this. I cold emailed 100 reporters, and then Gregory Zuckerman at the Wall Street Journal got involved. We talked for a while, and 9 months later, he had a front page story about care.com babysitters not passing background checks with criminal histories and killing several children just because this company wasn't doing their job. And then that put me on the map. That's why people kind of cared about my newsletter, even though I was really young. The stock collapsed, the CEO, CFO, and general counsel all resigned, and they got new management. And from what I can tell, the safety issues have kind of been fixed. It's not that extreme now, but that was another company that had a lot of issues. And, it kind of made me obsessed with this idea that literally just anybody, if you see a lot of local news reporting in different states and cities of these issues, it's just going to be a while before the national media catches up. And even though it matters a lot, there's a lot of groupthink in media. They're kind of slow to finding these issues out themselves, but you can really try to make a difference if you identify it early.
Absolutely. Now, when it comes to KinderCare, I know that you mentioned there's been no mainstream reporting of this, and it's a really big deal. It's getting our tax dollars. It's a huge company. We've got military families involved in this. Do you think it's one of those things where it's okay, they're just slow and they will catch up to your reporting eventually? Or do you think there's something else underneath that? Do you think there's a reason they're not reporting on KinderCare?
Well, I don't think it's corruption and sinister and the media wants to see kids abused. I do, actually one bigger reporter reached out to me after this, but they were so slow and they got so many stories. And, I think they're it's infuriating looking at the media. There's going to be 50 stories about some minor Trump thing, and there's going to be 100 stories trying to take down Elon Musk. And then the thing that can actually make a big societal difference, highlighting these abuses, getting Congress involved, changing the tax incentives, zero media reporting. And I just think there's a lot of groupthink in media. And I know one big theme with relatable is independent thinking. And there's very little of that in, I think, mainstream media. These stories are also difficult. It's easy to write a headline about Trump and Elon and some small thing and then get a lot of clicks. It's a lot more work to do this type of research, to spend 6 months on it and talk to former employees and get corporate records and really demonstrate the abuses. So this is the type of thing that's a lot of work, not a lot of clicks. It may, drive some subscriptions if people very much value independent journalism, but it's for whatever reason, I think the media has a tougher time putting it together. The media is very tips based, and if one parent just says, "Oh, I've had a bad experience at this," I don't know if it'll click to them that it's actually systemic, because it's tough for an outsider to really say is this systemic or is this a one-off when it is systemic for KinderCare. So yeah, I would love to see more mainstream media write about KinderCare. But for now, I'm happy to go on your podcast, Allie, and talk about it. This is a good substitute.
Me too. Okay, another story that involves kids is Roblox. And we've talked a little bit about Roblox and just the capabilities that it has, the vulnerabilities that it has. We've talked about how predators use Roblox, but you found a lot of disturbing stuff that's going on.
Yeah, so Roblox is, I think, the absolute worst. Let me put it this way. Roblox is the best way for sex offenders and abusers to meet kids. Just across the board, you can literally look at interviews with pedophiles and stuff. They say they like meeting kids through Roblox. And now the reason Roblox is so dangerous, it's a game where young kids play online, 6 to 14, is that there's a few things. One, there's a lot of open messaging. You can easily message people back and forth. It's easy to fake being young. So anybody can go on Roblox, you can be 40, you can say you're 12, you make a little avatar, you can make 3 different avatars, and then you can start talking to kids and manipulating them. It's easy to get their contact info and move off platform. Parents kind of assume it's safe, even though it's not. And then just over and over and over and over again, you see like a registered sex offender. They go on Roblox, they typically make a few accounts, they pretend to be multiple different people, but it's all the same person. And they start talking to like a 7-year-old or something, convince them that they're their friend, convince them to like, get out of the house and like go down the block, and then like essentially kidnap them and like drive like 500 miles across state lines. And, I think I've seen like 24 incidences like this. And, again, everyone kind of writes it off as a one-off, but it's like systemic within Roblox. And there's a few other issues that make it really bad on Roblox, because the kids are so young. To sign up to make a Roblox account, all you need to do is give a username and password. You often don't need an email, and you're not required to give a phone number. And just that distinction versus most of social media is actually a huge issue, because there's no limit to the number of usernames and passwords you can make. You can make a Roblox account, get caught inappropriately messaging kids, get banned, make a second Roblox account, make a third Roblox account, make 100th Roblox account. There's nothing Roblox can really do to shut you down, versus if you require a phone number at sign up, there's only so many phone numbers you can have. You can only get banned so many times before it becomes a nuisance to keep obtaining new phone numbers. So that's like one very simple thing that makes Roblox so much more dangerous than other platforms. Yeah, I think parents really underestimate the dangers of Roblox. I think the KinderCare stuff is slightly worse. People know, like, kids online, you need to be like wary of things. But yeah, but Roblox has a ton of these issues of like just young kids, being manipulated by these like older adults and like being kidnapped.
Last sponsor is NetSuite. NetSuite is also for all of you small business owners out there. You need one source of truth. You want to make sure that you've got all of your numbers, all of your KPIs in one place to make sure that you are achieving your goals. And NetSuite by Oracle is the #1 cloud ERP that over 38,000 businesses are using to future-proof their business. With one unified business management suite, you've got that one source of truth, giving you the visibility and control you need to make quick decisions. You've got real-time insights and forecasting, so you're looking into the future with actionable data. If you are a business owner, you know how important all of this is. If you go to NetSuite, that's netsuite.com/Allie, you can download the CFO's Guide to AI and Machine Learning. That's netsuite.com/Allie. How is it mentioning the or hosting the school shooting games? I don't really know like what Roblox even is as a game. I've never seen the app before. So how is that working?
So Roblox is unlike many games where there's a lot of user-generated content. So users can create games that other people play. And there's this long tail of like hundreds of thousands or millions of games on Roblox. And Roblox has historically claimed they care a ton about content moderation. Every item, every game is going to be reviewed by a human before it's uploaded, but that's clearly not the case. And like what I found just like looking into it a little bit and like kind of going down the Reddit rabbit holes and stuff is there's a lot of games that are totally inappropriate. There's like Holocaust reenactment games. Ugh. There's literally like school shooting games where you can play as a school shooter in like a replica of a school and like see how many kids you can kill within Roblox. It's super, super, super messed up. And it's just a sign that they're not doing moderation. And what happens is the games go viral, kids are being immature and bad and like playing the games. And then once it gets a lot of traction, Roblox will ultimately shut it down. But then someone will just make another account and re-upload it. And it's like absurd that this platform, like if you want to play like school shooting games, the way it's like most accessible is on the platform for like really young kids. And it's not just like, hypothetical, like real school shooters have like mentioned their like, love of Roblox and playing on Roblox. So, it's a very sensitive topic and I'm not the most informed on it, but it's kind of absurd that you have a game played thousands of times on Roblox being re-uploaded constantly where like you can, role play as a school shooter. It's like that is, and nothing happens to the company.
Right. And
for
kids
hosting
can
this
access
content.
that. So you've got a 6-year-old boy who can access that. They can access all kinds of pornographic material. They can be talking to a predator who might pose as, another 7-year-old boy, but is really an adult. And as you said, there's really no safety mechanism in place to make sure you are who you say you are, that you're the age that you say you are. There was this 87-page whistleblower document that was shared with you from employees saying, yeah, the company knows that these issues exist.
Yeah, so I've been writing about Roblox for the last 3 years. I'm like, I kind of get obsessed with these companies, and sometimes what happens is when you write on them a lot and start publishing information, is former employees will reach out to you and say, actually, it's really bad, and here's more evidence. So there is these like kind of internal messages, kind of like in a Slack, but like internal message boards where Roblox employees say, I wouldn't let my kids play these games. These games are not safe. They're so much worse than other places on the internet. So I got a copy of that, and it's like pretty bad. It's like they know it's bad. And the thing with Roblox is it would be so easy to improve the safety. It's not like this is a complicated issue. You require phone numbers at signups. Maybe you require people to verify IDs, or in order to have the ability to chat with other people, you need to verify your ID first. So anybody can play, but if you want the chat functionality, which is really like the stepping stone for abuse, you need to verify your ID. Doing those little steps of friction hurt the company. It's maybe a little less likely people will sign up, but it would totally transform safety, because then you could permanently ban people. Then you could cross-reference with the sex offenders list. You make sure people like are an appropriate age. So you don't have a 40-year-old talking to an 8-year-old. Very, very like low-hanging fruit to just transform the safety of the platform. It just comes with cost and lower user growth. And so the easy transformation, they're just not going to do it. And I kind of hope if there's more media reporting on it, the company will be shamed into doing it. The other thing they could do is just invest more in moderation. It should be that every game uploaded to Roblox is reviewed by a human. So you don't have like school shooting reenactment games. But that's just not the case right now. And I'd note over the years, they used to advertise, we look at every item, we look at every game, and they kind of softened the language around that, because I can tell they're afraid of getting sued and they don't want to have as strong of a language, but they still present themselves in a very safe platform when they're not.
Yeah. Edwin, I'm just sitting here listening to you and wondering if you have ever received any threats over your reporting.
Yeah, so ironically, the worst one was probably care.com. So I was the student at Stanford, and they literally somehow, I think like some donors were on care.com's board. They like got a hold of the dean of students and were complaining about me. And
Wow.
as like a sophomore, the dean of students calls me in, and I'd never really been in trouble before. And they're like, you're violating our, Wi-Fi policy, and you're impersonating other people, and like you can't do this using Stanford Wi-Fi. Will you take the article down? And it's like, that's the first time I got a taste of like how the world works, the backdoor shenanigans. And I was like kind of floored that they weren't supporting me. And then care.com also sent a private investigator to my house, where my dad, calls me one day, and he's like, yeah, some guy with like a body cam showed up to our house and was asking questions about you. I typically I've done this a while, so I kind of know which guys are like the really bad actors who are going to like really go after you, versus when you go after large corporations, the kind of standard thing is they might mess around, they might send you a cease and desist, they might sue you, but they're not going to like kill you. Where if you go after international companies, the standards there are a lot different, where it's very less tolerant of criticism. But if you're going after large US listed companies and you're not saying anything incorrect and you're backing it up with information, and I'm not trading the stock, I think I'm somewhat protected. One issue is when the companies actually have issues, there's going to be discovery and litigation. So if they sued me, they might end up exposing more about themselves. Right. I think I have an advantage kind of being young and having a little bit of an internet following, where if I did get sued, it's going to be a lot of bad headlines for them. And again, draw more attention to the issues. one thing I try to do to mitigate like legal risk is I really try to be understated. You see this trend in the media and, sometimes in finance where people want to be sensationalistic and, just like fraud, scam, red letters, exclamation point, it's going to zero. I do none of that. I really try to let the evidence speak for itself and just kind of lay out the facts and let people draw their own conclusions. Doing that kind of protects me a little, but you still get nonsense from time to time. I don't know if I would say death threats, but I get occasional emails being like dead Edwin walking. And it's like, that's not, pleasant to receive.
Right.
I got a cease or desist or two over the years, but I've never been sued. I'm not too worried because it's, again, large US companies where the most they're going to do, I think, is sue me. And I think as long as I'm saying stuff that's truthful and understated and have evidence, I don't think they're going to do that. And fortunately, the Bear Cave newsletter has been kind of successful where I could probably afford one lawsuit. Not that I'd want to spend a lot of money on it, but I could probably afford like one big fight.
Yeah. Okay. Well, just in case you have lawsuits coming your way, everyone needs to subscribe. So you could maybe afford 2 lawsuits if needed.
Yeah.
Hopefully that will never be necessary, but everyone should subscribe to your Substack anyway, just because, you're the only one I know that's giving this kind of information. Maybe there are other independent journalists out there that are also doing it, but I appreciate you, especially that you also focus on companies that are endangering children. That's relevant to people no matter your political persuasion, but especially us parents out there, like we just really need to know what's going on. So thank you so much, Edwin. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and Allie, thanks so much for having me on your show. I think independent media like yours is so, so, so important. It's the way these stories can get told. So I think you deserve a lot of credit too for having me on and letting me share some of these issues. So thank you.
Thank you, Edwin. I appreciate it. Quick reminder to sign up for Share the Arrows. Get your tickets at sharethearrows.com. If you are a Christian woman, this is the conference for you. Hard-hitting, solid theology, apologetics training, encouragement, and edification as moms, as any woman in any stage of life. We'll even be talking about how to live biblically healthy lives. So go to sharethearrows.com. That's sharethearrows.com, October 11th, Dallas, Texas. That's where you can get your tickets. That's sharethearrows.com.